So we spent a lot of time, arguably too much time, talking about like different types of prompts and how to deal with them, or not how to deal with them, but like what to expect and sort of how to anticipate, which that anticipation is really going to come in handy. Because what it does is it narrows the scope of what you likely need to know. Is it 100% accurate? No. Is it 100% reliable? Absolutely not. But it gives it's worked for me. And so sort of like using this sort of theme of trying to look smarter than you feel, like in dealing with that. There are so many iOS frameworks, so many specifics, like even if you're in a team-based interview, like I didn't know AV Foundation for my team that works very heavily with AV Foundation. I had just come from YouTube and I was at Google, and like Google has this very specific way of doing iOS where they basically put their own wrappers around all of like the native iOS, like first party libraries. So you really don't get like a good like look at iOS as the rest of the world does it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just if you're trying to get ready for an interview and you want to be prepared with like what the interview is going to look like, having like a Google or like any sort of organization's wrapper around like native iOS, it certainly makes you feel self-conscious and like you won't be ready for it. So this is like this section, I'm going to share just like a handful of tips that shouldn't work, but they do. Try them. It's unbelievable. So in iOS interviews, there's a whole bunch of hangups that I've kind of run into personally and that I've seen candidates run into. And based on whether it's like this sort of detailed style prompt or the high level prompt, you kind of run into a lot of similar issues, but there are some differences. So for like the detailed prompt, because of the fact that it's detailed, if the prompt itself is on a domain area you did not prepare for or you don't have very, very much experience with, that's a problem. You're starting off with a question that you have no idea and that you've never done. Like and just like it can feel insurmountable going into one of these system design interviews, which for me tended to be one of the last interviews of the day, for like these either virtual on-site or the actual on-site interviews. So like you're coming off the back of like 5 straight hours of coding interviews, really rough. And then to get a prompt for system design that you don't know, ooh, it can be devastating. So just like knowing that and like preparing for that eventuality, because it's gonna happen. Probably, unless you're better than me, which you probably are. Also, very, very similar to the prompt would be just implementing unfamiliar components, because detailed, like this detailed prompt flavor deals with, it's a little bit closer to like actually implementing it in code. It can pose some problems, but not problems that you can't overcome or sidestep. The high level, the most blaring hang up is that it's just overwhelmingly ambiguous. The first thing they say to you is like, you know, you're Amazon and you're trying to deal with all the returns. Like, how do you build a system business process that handle that? Like, I feel like I have 100 follow-up questions and they're coming into my head in like a very non-linear format. Like I'm thinking like, well, what's my role? Do I have formal authority? Like what's How many are coming in? How many people do I have to handle them? Do I have any automated systems? Like I have so many questions that like even getting the answers to those one at a time is not going to help me because I'm not going to be able to hold that information in my working memory. Like that ambiguity is like deceptively insidious. Like in that not only is it like hard to come up with like to identify like the key questions, but it's also hard to like categorize and structure the answers you receive in a way that like you can make sense of it and like produce something that like or like produce a system that takes those into account. The other thing that I absolutely tend to do, especially when I first started, was over explain, specifically over explaining concepts that I actually know less about than I thought I do. Another version of over explaining would likely be like over implementing. You shouldn't implement something where an interface will suffice in a systems design interview. Like you might even be able to get away with that in like a data structures and algorithms interview if they're not requiring that the code actually run. Like, and it's like sort of like an iOS style. Like I've gotten away with declaring like a protocol and then saying I'll come back to it, and then we run out of time and we never have to come back to it. We solved it. Like the implementation a lot of times is pretty self-evident, especially if you say like, well, in this we're just going to sort by this particular category, like particular field, or using this predicate or something. Anyways, we'll dive more into that in just a minute. So when you're stuck, if the goal is to appear smarter than you may actually feel, there's generally going to be two strategies that you're going to implement, just like on a conceptual level, right? You want to play to your strengths and you want to hide your weaknesses. So like some of your strengths that you have control over, your soft skills, like not losing your cool, collaborating effectively, communicating both in written, illustrative, like your actual like design illustrations, and injecting structure, like just approaching the problem from like with sort of like a problem solving framework in mind. All of those things, because we discussed it earlier in data structures and algorithm questions, you're trying to find the optimal solution. In this, you're just trying to find a well-justified solution, right? And so like if you approach the problem itself in a structured and methodical manner, that is injecting structure into this ambiguity. Does that make sense? If that's a weird concept. So like if that's at all unclear, we want to spend any more time on kind of that. I mean, we will in a minute, but just let me know. Obfuscating weaknesses, hiding them. Ideally, you can avoid discussing something that you don't know well. Just avoid it at all, like discussing it at all. There's this like kind of stick and move strategy where you might consider it like put a pin in this. Like you'd say to the interviewer, "Here's the protocol. I'll come back to this later," and other lies we tell. I've gotten away with that quite a bit, where we define a protocol or define the interface and say, "I'll come back to this," and it's just something that's not super interesting. And then you move on to something where you are much stronger. Like if I'm good at API design, but I'm bad at like like the command pattern. I'm bad at like I don't know, like implementing a router. I'm bad like this is something like I'm not great at networking, but like I'm good at actually like defining that API and saying what the calls would look like, but not like actually implementing the networking calls themselves and then handling the response or something like that. Just defining that protocol and then like, this is just a placeholder. I'm coming back to this, and then leaving. And you run out of time. You could go back to it, but like it sort of behooves you not to. Another one would be answering the question you want or you wish they had asked rather than the one you were actually asked. And this isn't so much as a way of like not doing what you're asked. It's more of like it's more of another way of like removing more ambiguity, right? Like when if I was that Amazon prompt, if we did the Amazon prompt where you're dealing with returns, sometimes the best thing you can do is just like ask yourself a question that you think you know the answer to, and then just small bites. Ask yourself the next question. And if that doesn't get the train roll, like sort of the proverbial train rolling in solving the larger issue, it'll at least keep you busy for a few minutes. So you avoid doing what I call like being a choo-choo train, where someone asks you, like provides the prompt and you just go, that is a big problem for me. It was, anytime I see myself being a choo-choo train, I always have to say, "Oh, I'm being a choo-choo train. I need to actually discuss like my thought process." And I will literally say that out loud. The interviewer sees that like I am recognizing what I'm doing and that I'm not sharing, and then I start sharing, and like it sort of gives you like something in the win column just to say like, hey, like I know you're here to help me. I know like I'm trying to work through this, and you can't help if I'm not talking. And like whether or not it gives you bonus points, it gets you talking, which saying something, so long as you're not saying something that's completely wrong and it's more just like opinionated or you're like working through the issues, it's probably better than nothing. And then the last one, very similar to Stick and Move, is just pivoting. Just like if you're over explaining something, you know what? I won't over explain it. I'll just keep going.
Want to become a software engineer at Google? You can, like thousands of our students. You just need to learn from those who've already cleared FANG interviews. At Interview Kickstart, our interview prep courses are developed and taught live by 150 plus instructors from Tier 1 companies like Google and Facebook. Our courses are tailored to help you crack software engineering domain interviews, including back-end, full stack, machine learning, embedded systems, data science, and more. To learn more, book your 3 webinar slot today